She was barely 20, bright-eyed and naive, but eager for the excitement that seemed so far out of reach in her small town. Her boyfriend, her ex now, was a trucker who had spent years on the road, hauling freight across the country. He talked about the road as if it were a living, breathing entity. He convinced her that it would be an adventure, one she would never forget. She could already feel the lure of something dark and unknown pulling her in. It didn't take long for her to pack up her life, leave behind the comfort of familiarity, and join him on his travels. At first, it seemed like the perfect escape. The world opened up to her, vast, unpredictable, and exciting. They traveled from state to state, seeing the country in ways she never imagined. The wind, the miles, the fleeting towns, they were all part of an intoxicating freedom. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the loneliness began to set in. The life of a trucker wasn't just about the open road. It was about isolation. It was about being trapped in a small, moving space for hours on end, with only the hum of the engine and the static buzz of the CB radio for company. The longer she stayed on the road, the more she realized that the trucker's world wasn't all sunshine and long, open highways. It was a world full of strange, often dangerous people, lonely souls hiding behind the anonymity of their CB handles. At first, it was just small talk on the radio. But as time wore on, she began to hear things. Strange voices. Whispers of truck stops where things weren't quite right. Drivers who seemed off. She began to wonder if the highway, like a living creature, fed on the fears and secrets of the people who traveled it. It was in this world of unsettling conversations and eerie encounters that she first heard the voice of Maniac. The radio crackled to life one evening, and a voice pierced the silence. It wasn't like any voice she had ever heard before. It was slow, raspy, like someone speaking through gritted teeth. It had a kind of mocking quality, like the speaker was enjoying some dark joke at her expense. The voice called out, "Hey there, Purple Pete. Where ya headed?" Her boyfriend, Ninja Dwarf, answered the call. They had been on the road for hours, heading toward Arkansas, but there was something about the voice that made the woman's stomach tighten. She didn't like it. Maniac was his name. He had introduced himself that way. He said he was heading the same way and asked if he could tag along. The conversation felt casual, but it lingered in her mind long after the radio fell silent. 4 weeks, they kept running into Maniac, on different highways, in different states. It became a strange pattern. He was always in the distance, never too close, but always just far enough to make the woman uneasy. No matter where they went, Maniac seemed to be just behind them, lurking in the shadows of the long roads. As the days wore on, Maniac's conversations grew more bizarre, more disturbing. He seemed to know too much about them. About their routes, their destinations, even their personal lives. He would make offhand comments about their appearance, the truck, even the way they drove. It was as if he had been watching them for days. It was during one of these strange conversations that he casually mentioned the lot lizards, the prostitutes who worked the truck stops. He talked about them with a casual cruelty, referring to them as nasty sluts and diseased ones, laughing in a way that made her skin crawl. She tried to brush it off, but there was an underlying malice in his tone that she couldn't ignore. One night, as they pulled into a truck stop in Las Vegas, they were met with a disturbing sight. Flashing lights, police cars, ambulances, and a coroner's van. Something was wrong. The woman's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't shake the feeling that Maniac was somehow involved. They didn't think much of it at first. Truck stops were often scenes of crime, prostitutes, shady deals, and the occasional brawl between drivers. But as they passed the scene, they overheard snippets of conversation. A woman had been found dead, a lot lizard, brutally murdered. Her mind raced. Was this Maniac's doing? He had always talked about the sick fuck who was targeting truck stops, but she never thought he might be the one behind it. The thought lingered, cold and heavy, in the pit of her stomach. A few weeks later, in Oklahoma, Maniac's tone became even darker. He talked about the murders, how there was one killer who was targeting the women at truck stops, leaving behind no trace, no evidence. Whoever it is, Maniac laughed, he's either really smart or he wants to get caught. His voice was chilling in its casualness. They couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong, but they tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was just a trucker's tall tale, a bit of road gossip to pass the time. But then, in Mississippi, they heard about it again. The lot lizard murders. By the time they reached Tennessee, they had decided to meet Maniac in person. It had been months of eerie radio conversations, and her boyfriend was eager to finally put a face to the name. She wasn't thrilled about it, but she didn't want to argue. The truck stop was empty when they arrived, too empty for comfort. They sat in the diner, waiting. The air was thick with tension. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that they were being watched. It was the same eerie sensation she had gotten every time Maniac spoke to them on the radio, but now, it was tangible. She could feel his presence, like a shadow hanging over them. But Maniac never showed up. The time came and went, and still, no sign of him. They ate their meal in silence, the unease gnawing at them. A few months later, in a truck stop in Mississippi, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A bobtail truck was parked in a spot meant for long rigs. The driver was sitting in the passenger seat, and as they walked by, he gave them a creepy, distorted smile. It was then that the woman realized. The truck had a cattle guard and a brow, just like the one Maniac had described. It was the same truck. The same driver. Her heart raced. Something told her to keep walking, to get away from this truck stop before it was too late. That night, they heard the sirens. They walked outside to see a massive police presence at the truck stop. Cops, ambulances, and a coroner's van. But the woman knew something was wrong the moment she saw the crowd gathered around a trailer. A body had been found, mutilated beyond recognition. A lot lizard. The sight of the woman's body, tied to the trailer and ripped in half, would haunt her forever. It was a gruesome scene, something straight out of a horror movie. And she knew, deep down, that Maniac was responsible for it. As they made their way back to the truck, they heard a familiar voice on the CB. It was Maniac. This time though, his tone was even more chilling. "You two should watch out," he warned. "The world's full of diseased ones. And I think you know what happens to them." The woman shuddered. She had heard the stories, but hearing Maniac say it so casually made her blood run cold. In New Orleans, they stopped at a small truck stop near the French Quarter. It was quiet, too quiet. Then, on the CB, Maniac's voice crackled through. "Hey there, Purple Pete," he said, his voice taunting. "Long time no see." The woman's stomach twisted. The truck stop was small, but the presence of Maniac seemed to fill the air. The truck, a dark Peterbilt with a cattle guard, rolled slowly past them. His red CB handle Maniac was written in bright red letters on the door. And just as it passed, his voice came through again. "I'd hate to run into you again." Months later, they would hear news about the murders. 7 women, maybe more, had been killed. All in the same brutal way. And Maniac. He was never caught. There were no answers, just more questions. Had he really been a trucker all along? Or was he? Lover of classic cars and trucks, I knew instantly that this was a deal I couldn't pass up. The truck was almost brand new, with just 25,000 miles on the odometer, which seemed impossible for a vehicle of that age. It looked pristine, almost like it had just rolled off the assembly line. The seller had priced it incredibly low, and I quickly realized it was worth at least $17,000 in its condition. The deal was too good to resist, and I didn't hesitate for a second. I had to drive 750 miles to pick it up, but that was nothing for me. It was an adventure, and I was excited. My friend, Dean, came along for the ride. I drove my car, while Dean drove the truck back. We set off early, with the truck's engine purring smoothly as we hit the highway. The miles passed quickly, and by the time we arrived, I couldn't wait to see the truck in person. When I met the previous owner, he seemed like a nice guy. He explained that the truck had belonged to his father, who hadn't used it in years. Unfortunately, his father had passed away, and now the truck just sat there, collecting dust. The son had put some new tires on it and decided to sell it. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to give it a new home. We exchanged a few more words, completed the paperwork, and I was officially the proud owner of a classic Chevy truck. On our way back, we decided to stop for a quick meal at a local restaurant. It was one of those places that didn't look like much from the outside, but the food was fantastic. We ordered a burger, fries, a soda, and a shake. The burgers tasted like they were made from fresh, never-frozen beef, perfectly grilled with just the right amount of seasoning. The fries were crispy on the outside and soft on the inside, and they were some of the best I'd ever had. In fact, they were only second to the fries at my friend's restaurant, but he's never told me the secret recipe. Maybe he wants to keep it a mystery for himself. We were having a great time, chatting and enjoying the meal, and the total bill came to just $27. Not bad for such a great meal. We also took advantage of the free Wi-Fi to check our messages and relax for about 30 minutes before continuing our trip. It was a nice break, and we were ready to hit the road again. After some more driving, we found a hotel for the night. The plan was to get one room with 2 beds to save money. It was already 11 p.m., and after traveling for over 41 hours straight, we were both exhausted. We had covered 200 miles so far on our way back, and we couldn't wait to hit the hay. We both quickly got into our beds and, just like that, we were asleep. The beds were comfortable, and the room was quiet. The trip had been long, and we both needed a good night's sleep before finishing the remaining miles. The lights went out, and we were both in dreamland within minutes. At 3 a.m., the phone in the room rang, waking us up. I answered it, groggy and half asleep, to hear the front desk staff on the other end. "Hello, sir. I think it's your truck out front that's causing a commotion. The panic alarm has been going off for about 20 minutes. I was wide awake now, panic setting in. "What? Is it a black truck?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Yes," she confirmed. "It's your truck, and the alarm has been going off for quite some time. Don't worry, if someone had broken in, the cameras would have caught it." I quickly grabbed the truck keys, thinking someone must have broken into the truck. I rushed outside to find the truck sitting there with the alarm blaring and all the lights on. It was exactly how I had left it. I quickly turned the key, and the alarm stopped. But what struck me as odd was that nothing seemed to be wrong with the truck. There were no signs of a break-in, and the surveillance footage from the hotel showed only a car driving by. After that, the lights and alarm had triggered. It didn't make any sense. I shrugged it off, thinking that maybe someone had hacked into the truck's computer and made it malfunction. It seemed like the most logical explanation, though I wasn't entirely sure. The whole situation was unsettling, but I decided to let it go. The rest of the night was uneventful. We got back on the road the next day, heading home. It was a beautiful, sunny Friday, with just the right temperature and a slight breeze. The drive was peaceful, and we made it home without any other strange occurrences. Dean left after I paid him for his help, and I spent the day enjoying the nice weather. But there was something in the back of my mind that kept nagging at me about the truck. The alarm and lights going off without explanation were just the start of what was to come. A few days later, I decided to take the truck out for a drive with a few friends. We were going to have some fun, and I figured I'd show off my new ride. Everything seemed fine as we cruised down the road. But then, something strange happened. The truck's lights turned on by themselves, and the horn blared for a few seconds. Everyone in the truck turned to look at each other, wondering what the hell was going on. We didn't think much of it at first, but it was definitely unusual. The lights turned off as quickly as they had turned on, and we shrugged it off, continuing on our way. But there was an underlying sense of unease that none of us could shake. That night, we had a great time, laughing and joking around. We drank a little too much, but that was part of the fun. Our mostly sober friend, who I'll call OK, wanted to drive, but it was my truck, so I insisted on driving. We got in the truck, radio blasting, and continued our ride. As we drove, suddenly the radio switched to a talk station. We weren't paying much attention to it until we realized what was playing. The segment was about drunk driving accidents and crashes. The broadcaster was recounting a story of a couple who had crashed and died. It was eerie, given our state of mind. We all laughed it off at first, assuming one of us was messing with the radio. But when we looked at each other, we realized no one had touched it. Then, the truck suddenly shut off, everything died at once. The lights, the engine, everything. We pulled over to check what was wrong. Nothing seemed to be amiss. I tried to restart the truck, but it wouldn't turn on. The only thing that worked was the radio, which started playing again. But this time, we heard a voice, faint at first, then clearer, "Goodbye." We were all freaked out now. What the hell was going on? Suddenly, out of nowhere, an 18-wheeler came speeding toward us. In our drunken state, we didn't have the reflexes to do anything. We just froze as the semi-truck bore down on us. But it didn't hit us the way we expected. Instead, the semi slammed into the truck and then vanished. It was like the truck had just disappeared into thin air. We were all in shock, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. How could a semi just disappear like that? But then, just as suddenly, the truck came back to life. The engine roared, and the lights turned on. At this point, Jimmy, one of my friends, had had enough. He didn't want to ride in the truck anymore. "Screw this," he said. "I'm walking." The rest of us, still in shock but not willing to admit how terrified we were, reluctantly got back into the truck. We drove alongside Jimmy the whole way to his house, trying to get him to get back in the truck. But he refused, saying, "Screw that truck. I'm never riding in it again." Just as we were about to drop him off, the truck's RPMs shot up, revving uncontrollably. We were all terrified by what was happening. I finally got home, shaken by the night's events. But when I walked into the garage the next morning, I was horrified to see that the garage door was broken. Half of it was hanging from the ceiling, and the other half had fallen to the ground. I glanced inside the garage, and for a split second, I thought I saw two people sitting in the truck. Then they disappeared. I turned to look at the ground, and there it was, a dead cat, lying motionless in front of the truck. "Okay, you know what? I'm done," I said aloud. I couldn't handle it anymore. I immediately called the guy I bought the truck from to demand an explanation. I wasn't gentle when I called the previous owner. I ranted and cursed at him, but his response was chilling. "The truck used to be my dad's," he said, speaking slowly. "But it has a dark past. My brother and his girlfriend borrowed it one day. My dad always told them to return it by 10 p.m., but they didn't come back. The next morning, the police found the truck full of blood. No bodies were ever found. Some people think they ran away together, while others think they were murdered. My dad was so traumatized by what happened that he put the truck up on blocks and never touched it again until he passed away." I couldn't breathe when I heard the story. My hands were shaking. The truck I had bought, the same truck I had been driving, was the very same one where two people had disappeared, possibly murdered. The eerie events I had experienced made sense now. I had been driving a vehicle haunted by the ghosts of those two individuals. I had seen their spirits. I was done. There was no way I could continue with this. The truck had to go. It was the only way to free myself from the horrors that had followed me. It was a crisp, late autumn morning when my father, who we'll call S, and my uncle, who we'll call N, set off on their cross-country road trip. The year was 1983, and my father was a 22-year-old truck driver, fresh out of a rough couple of years, and my uncle was 16, full of youthful energy and curiosity. Both men were eager for the adventure, though for different reasons. My father was used to the open road, a life spent behind the wheel, while my uncle was simply excited by the thought of exploring the vast unknown. They had driven out of Seattle, making their way across the United States toward the southern reaches of Texas. As they passed through states like Idaho and Wyoming, my uncle marveled at the differences in landscape, the sheer emptiness of the plains, and the subtle beauty of the mountains rising in the distance. The journey, though long, was something my father had done many times before, and he didn't quite understand the fascination his younger brother had with the open road. Still, it was hard not to appreciate the tranquility that came with long stretches of highway, punctuated only by the hum of the engine. "I reckon we should stop for the night soon, N," my father said around dusk on the third day. Sure, I need to stretch my legs, my uncle replied, his eyes scanning the passing landscape as the last traces of sunlight bathed the horizon. Their journey had taken them to Nevada, and as the sun began to sink, the desert stretched out before them, vast and empty, an eerie quiet falling over the world. It was a perfect evening for a rest stop, but the further they drove, the more my father felt a creeping unease. As they neared a rest stop, my uncle noticed something peculiar off to the side of the road. The low light of dusk made it difficult to see clearly, but he could make out the figure of a large animal moving across the desert. Look at that, my uncle said in surprise. That's one big coyote. My father squinted at the creature, its size startling. That's no coyote, he muttered. That's a beast. The coyote, or whatever it was, moved swiftly through the brush, its dark fur blending into the landscape. It was large, almost impossibly so, and it had an eerie, unnatural grace to it as it disappeared into the scrubland. Good Lord, my father muttered. I've never seen one that big. My uncle nodded, his heart beginning to race as they slowly pulled into the rest stop. The oddity of the encounter lingered in the air like an unspoken question. Was it just a trick of the light? Or had they seen something truly strange? When they arrived at the rest stop, my father couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had taken hold of him. The place was nearly deserted, save for a couple of trucks parked at the far end. A dim light flickered overhead, and the wind whispered through the empty lot. My father couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense of unease. You okay, my uncle asked, noticing the sudden change in his demeanor. I don't know, my father replied, his voice low. It's just too quiet out here. My uncle, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. Probably just your imagination. Let's grab some rest and get moving in the morning. But my father wasn't so sure. He noticed that there were no other people around, and the air felt wrong, like the entire place was holding its breath. After a brief stop, my uncle headed off to the bathrooms while my father settled into the back of the truck. The night air was cool, and the stillness around them was almost oppressive. My father quickly made his bed and changed into his pajamas. His thoughts were unsettled though, and sleep didn't come easily. The night passed slowly, and as the hours wore on, my uncle found it difficult to fall asleep. The eerie silence outside seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. Around midnight, he was awakened by a soft noise, almost like a tapping sound. He lay still, trying to figure out what it was. It came again, gentle at first, like claws on metal. He listened intently, his heart beginning to race. Must be an animal, he muttered to himself. No reason to get worked up over nothing. But the tapping didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. And then, it began to move around the truck, like something circling them in the night. The next morning, the sun rose over the desert, casting a golden light over the barren landscape. My father woke up first, groggily rubbing his eyes. The night had been restless, but he was eager to get back on the road. He grabbed his toothbrush and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. When he returned, he noticed something strange. The passenger door of the truck was covered in deep scratches, like something had raked its claws across it. My father's stomach sank as he examined the marks. That wasn't there last night, he muttered, his heart pounding in his chest. What the hell happened? His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. There had been no sounds or signs of trouble, and yet the scratches were unmistakable. My uncle emerged from the truck, stretching and yawning as he greeted the new day. He too noticed the scratches and, looking over at my father, asked, "Did you hear anything last night, S?" "No," my father replied, though he felt a chill run down his spine. "But I've got a bad feeling about this place." They quickly finished their breakfast and packed up the truck. As they drove off, the sounds of the highway filled the air. But as they passed Quinn River Crossing, a distant howl echoed through the desert. "Did you hear that?" my uncle asked, his voice filled with unease. My father nodded, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Yeah, it sounded like a wolf, but different. It wasn't right. As they continued along the highway, they began to feel the weight of the road pressing down on them. The vast emptiness of Nevada stretched out before them, and the quiet of the desert seemed to close in around the truck. There was something about the stillness that made both men uneasy. They pulled over halfway to Happy Creek to stretch their legs and relieve themselves. But as they climbed back into the truck, they heard a strange thump on the side of the trailer. My father's heart skipped a beat as he looked out the rearview mirror. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. "Something hit us," my uncle said, his voice filled with alarm. "Let's go. Now." Without thinking, my father slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator, trying to put as much distance as possible between them and whatever had just hit them. They had just passed Happy Creek when it happened. The truck suddenly jolted as something large slammed against it. The sound of scraping metal filled the air as my father's heart pounded in his chest. "What the hell?" my father shouted, looking to his brother. "Get us out of here." The creature that had been following them had now caught up, its hulking form matching the truck's speed. It was running beside the cab, keeping pace with them even as the truck sped up to 80 miles per hour. "My God, look at that thing," my uncle gasped, eyes wide with terror. The creature was massive, its fur dark and matted, and its legs moved with an unnatural fluidity. It shifted from running on 4 legs to 2, moving faster than anything they had ever seen. "It's keeping up with us," my father yelled, his voice rising in panic. They could see it now more clearly in the headlights, a giant wolf-like creature with glowing eyes, its form twisted and grotesque. The creature didn't just run beside them, it began to climb the truck. My father heard a sickening scrape as the creature's claws dug into the metal, and before he could react, it had leapt onto the hood of the truck. The creature began to claw at the engine bay, its eyes wild and filled with malice. "Shit!" my father shouted, slamming the horn in an attempt to shake the creature off. It worked. For a moment. The creature leapt off the hood, but just as quickly, it landed back on the ground and continued to chase them. The truck's tires screeched as my father pushed the pedal to the floor, accelerating to over 100 miles per hour. From the rearview mirror, my uncle saw the creature fall behind. But then, they heard it. A screech that seemed to tear through the very air. A sound so haunting and unnatural it sent chills down their spines. In a frantic bid to escape, my father pushed the truck even faster, the speedometer creeping past 110 miles per hour. The creature's shriek faded into the distance, but the terror of the chase still gripped their hearts. They didn't stop until they reached the next town, where they dropped off the trailer. As they stood outside the truck, my uncle couldn't help but look over his shoulder, half expecting the creature to appear again. "Do you think we lost it?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," my father replied, his mind still reeling. "But I'm not taking any chances." After unloading the trailer in Houston, the two men were asked numerous questions about the truck's damage. But neither of them spoke of the creature. They couldn't bring themselves to. The events that had unfolded over the last few days were beyond explanation, and they couldn't find the words to convey the terror they had experienced. When they asked their father to buy them plane tickets home, he didn't ask any questions. He knew something had happened, but he could see the fear in his son's eyes and didn't push. When they arrived back in Seattle, they never spoke of the events in Nevada again. Their father asked what had happened, but neither man could explain it. The terror, the creature, the chase, those memories were too much to bear. They had survived, but they were forever changed by the experience. Even now, they rarely mention that night, as if acknowledging it would somehow bring it back to life. The creature, the howl, and the unexplainable terror remained a silent bond between them, something they both knew, but never spoke of. And so, the story of that night remained locked away in the depths of their minds, a haunting reminder of something they could never fully understand.